Morning all. Okay, let's continue looking at that recent Houdini versus Rybka match. And of course I've been using Rybka as my main analytical assistant when looking at master games on my own post-mortem analysis. And I'll probably continue to do so because Houdini, although it's theoretically from some new rating lists overtaking Rybka, it does seem to hog up my machines at the moment. Maybe my machines are outdated and I don't know, I'm not using the perfect configuration. But anyway, here is game 3 from the recent match with Houdini playing black, and it kicked off with e4, so e5, classical response, knight f3, knight c6. So we have the Ruy Lopez, the arm wrestling around the e5 square. So white's consistently putting on pressure on e5. So bishop b5, a6. The pressure is attempted to be released with a6, chasing the bishop back. Now knight f6. Onto castles, bishop e7. All standard stuff. Rook e1, b5. Kicking the bishop onto that diagonal. Now black castled, and now we have a deviation away from what used to be absolute mainstream c3 move, which allows actually the Marshall Gambit, but so this is an anti-Marshall Gambit line now. a4. It's a good move. It's played by a lot of grandmasters. Just get a solid advantage with white without risking the Marshall Gambit, which is used by some GMs like Michael Adams actually to secure draws, if not try for a win against lower rated players. So anyway, here Houdini plays actually b4, and okay, b4 does kind of get a bit more space, but potentially this guy on a6, this pawn, is potentially a little bit weaker, and it's marked now with Rybka's next move, a5. Is this an exploitable weakness, this a6 pawn? That's one little theme of the game going on. So d6 and now c3. Black plays now rook b8, supporting the pawn. Now we have h3 and a little bit of pressure now on the b file. B takes, not minding getting rid of that pawn, and white actually captures away from the centre with d takes c3. So that's an interesting little decision there. Let's have a quick look actually with Rybka. I know I could be looking at Houdini at the same game and get different evaluations now, but if b takes c3, was there a big problem? Seems to like black after h6. So d takes c3 seems to be a preferred move here. Okay, what has dc3 got going for it? I think it marks the d5 square more from the queen, and maybe the idea is this a5 pawn later to be able to move the bishop and play b4. If the pawn is here, then it can't support the a5 pawn later with b4, so I think that might be the idea. dc3 fits in with the requirements, the issues already in the position, this a5 pawn's potential vulnerability. Now can it be taken here? Actually that's a good, no it can't because of the rook, sorry. Looking at the queen and okay, to err is human, to foul up things completely requires a computer. Just remember that when I make a mistake like that. So queen e8, and now white plays bishop a4, so it seems to be a useful pin. It's unpinned, bishop d7, and now queen e2. So white is targeting a6 and also is ready to play b4. Now knight a5, obviously there's bishop takes d7. When I say obviously, I assume bishop d7, then rook a5. Rook a8, defending that pawn anyway, so bishop c2. So white is reinforcing the centre, It's going to play b4. Looks fairly pleasant so far. Does black have counterplay? He plays queen b8, and after b4, okay, white's still got a nice protected pawn chain here, and a little bit of pressure on a6. So I remember I had a Hearts League game recently where I had a bit of pressure on a6, but is it an exploitable weakness? It's okay having things that look weak, but if they aren't actually weak, then the way a position looks, even if it's really ugly, sometimes it's functional, sometimes it's practical rather than theoretical. Okay, so is there substance to this weakness, this a6? Okay, knight d8, neat little knight maneuver to the centre to give the knight some greater independence. These options always are generated now once the knight is central on e6. Off the knight a3, looks like a knight on the rim move, but maybe the bishop has to move back for knight c2 to e3 to centralise that knight, or knight c4, more easy actually, without moving the bishop to e3. Also the knight might support b5 at the right moment, but rook e8, actually knight c4 is chosen. Okay, so queen b7, centralising the queen just a tiny little bit more, so hitting e4. Rook ad1. Okay, white's position looks neat and cosy and fairly solid. Black starts exerting a little bit of pressure now, bishop c6. Okay, now both sides start toying with each other. Okay, so rook b1, as though, I don't know, b5, is that going to be a possibility at some point in the future? Well, knight h5, with an immediate implication here, is the knight, one of the knights going to come to f4. Does it provoke a weakness? Yes, it does provoke a weakness. A permanent weakness, a weakness which the pawns cannot go back. Even engines cannot move pawns backwards. So this next move is maybe a major concession, the beginning of the end at this level, g3. We've already got this battery pointing at e4. It'll be piercing through white's king side, potentially, with weaknesses like g3, if white's not careful. Okay, so bishop b5, bishop d3. Usually you would say, well, easier said than done, but when you're talking about engines, you know, such weaknesses, the implementation of plans is getting pretty good nowadays. So looking at theoretical weaknesses like g3, saying as a major concession, it is a major concession at this level, it would appear, especially knowing the result of the game, of course. So knight f6, knight b2. So a bit of toying, and I'm just reminded of an effort actually with all this manoeuvring. I'm just going to move pieces and say it's a big cat and mouse game at the moment. So queen a8, but does it look as though the a6 pawn's pre here? Let's just quickly check that one out. Was a6 on? No, knight takes e4. It'll be swapping a centre pawn for a flank pawn. So white doesn't want to do that, because then this central pawn majority will be probably very dangerous soon. Especially also the diagonal's been blasted more wide open against the white king here. So that's to be avoided, bishop a6. Okay, so let's go back to the cat and mouse game. Quiet cat and mouse game. Nothing's going on, nothing's going on, nothing's going on. I'm not going to comment too much. Both sides just toying with each other. It's like a staring contest, staring at each other. Who's going to break first? Okay, who's going to break their staring concentration? Neither side so far, still staring at each other. Staring contest, staring contest. Bang! What was that? Bang! Hey? Black's just blundered a pawn. What? Shock! What happened here? What happened here? You might ask. Bishop b7, rook moves back, expecting just more cat and mouse, and now we see d5 at move 48. d5. What is this? A delayed Marshall Gambit, giving up the e5 pawn? Blimey. So here we start to see it is a liberating break in that, you know, again, these bishops are all extended in scope. The knights are virtually optimally placed in the centre with great independence, in inverted commas. But e5, you know, isn't that a major issue? Okay, so white takes on d5. And okay, one question though before taking on d5. Let's have a look at knight takes e5 here. Is there a big problem? Well, actually d takes, so maybe it's not a pawn sack as I thought, because this is getting the pawn back. If knight e4, that's just losing a piece, isn't it? Bishop e4. so basically, and the pawn's not too vulnerable there. Bishop c2, even knight g5, and black would be much better. Hitting e5, maybe coming into f3 potentially as well. Hitting h3 as well. That's not too pleasant. So in this position, actually, e5 isn't on, but because of d takes. So white plays e takes, and still a pawn's and pre now after knight takes d5, the c3 pawn. So the question, okay, before going into the game, if this is the beginning of the end, why did it happen there and not earlier? If we just go back to this apparently innocuous cat and mouse here after the bishop c8, you know, it seems black has no intention or interest really in breaking with d5, but the bishop had actually returned back to the diagonal with this battery now, this double battery of bishop and queen, and for some reason you know, it was allowed here. Well, c4 would weaken, you know, the d4 square, so maybe it was actually difficult to prevent then. But if that's the case, then white already has a compromised and passive position, just waiting for this powerful punch in the centre. We know it was compromised earlier with these knight manoeuvres provoking g3, which makes the diagonal a bit more sensitive, which makes this break a little bit more effective. So we've witnessed a very subtle beginning of the end with d5 now, but let's proceed. We're only at move 48 after all of an 86 move game. So e takes d5, knight takes d5. Okay. Now, the question is the exchange of a centre pawn for a flank pawn. Though is that a question? Knight takes e5. But does black take on c3 here? Let's see. If taking on c3, queen g4, and actually the king safety issues, this favours white. There's all sorts of threats here. What are the principal threats? If we just give a token move just to get an example idea, knight e4 threatens now knight f6, I guess. So so that's not too pleasant. Okay, and if bishop e4 here, bishop e4, see, this is terrible, absolutely terrible, disaster. Bishop b2, everything's pointing at the black king here. So that's to be avoided, taking on c3 probably. Well, Houdini actually chose now to give the pieces that magical kind of independence that I keep talking about with the centre. So rook bd8, and hopefully the more I talk about it and say about the magic of the centre, the more you value the centre in your own game. So I hope you don't mind that repetition of that central concept, the centre. I do think it's a bit of magic when pieces go to the centre, and it's not something to be underestimated. Okay, so rook bd8, but it is a pawn down. It's just given up a pawn. So what's going on here? This is another magic Houdini pawn sack. Does this make the game highly controversial, highly unsound? If it was a human game, you'd say, yeah, black's just a hacker. Why is he giving up pawn? But this is Houdini. So what has the engine calculated here? So Rybka plays actually bishop f5. why would this be useful as a consolidating move? Well, I guess knight e4 doesn't block in the bishop there. The bishop's still kind of operational on this diagonal, threatening always. Bishop e6, and maybe knight f7s might be useful later. In fact, I think there's probably an immediate knight f7 threat here, which is parried actually by this next move, knight g5. Okay, so what are the immediate threats? Well, as well as knight c3, I don't know, potentially, I guess, if the bishop wasn't protecting h3, then h3 would be vulnerable. But if a move like g6 is going to be too weakening, I expect, for the black king. But anyway, so c3 is probably the principal threat, which is parried now with this next move, queen c4. But it does allow knight takes b4, picking up the knight now, if a normal capture. But white instead plays this highly tactical move h4, and the game's been put into tactical chaos here. But there's one thing about it which is clear cut even for us human players, that the white king's like weak on the light squares here, particularly g2. So that this next move has a rather unsubtle threat of queen g2 mate, which is parried now with queen f1. And now we see rook takes d2 and bishop takes b4, a normal friendly transaction surely. Okay, white's still got a nice position, you might argue, but there's a rook on the 7th rank, and that rook on the 7th rank means pressure, tactical pressure, which is now emphasized now with this next move, knight e4. Okay, so the king can't take, because then there'll be a fairly nasty double check, winning the queen. So double check against the king. So that's to be avoided. f2 has to be protected. It's protected with knight g4. Giving up the light squared bishop doesn't look too pleasant an idea. Big advantage to black, I would say, without white having the protective light squared bishop. So that wouldn't be too hot. In principle anyway. So what white plays after knight e4 is actually knight g4 protecting f2, and now we see the bishop being kicked off the c3 pawn with c5. Okay, but is c3 actually munchable here? I guess it isn't. Let's have a quick check if that's worth checking. Rook takes, oh, of course, because the queen then wouldn't be defending the bishop, so king takes is perfectly good for white. So basically here, queen c6, and according to my Rybka on this proxy machine, black stands better here. Black's kind of won some sort of positional battle already to have a minus 1.22 advantage. Materially we're equal on material, but obviously positional trump cards, weakened king side, rook on the 7th, nice central knight which can't be taken without giving up a valuable light squared bishop. This bishop's kind of hemmed in, fragmented pawns over here, but they're complemented by fragmented pawns over here. Whoops, sorry, accidentally played a move there. So the pawn structure is not the major issue. It's here. I think it's the passivity of the pieces and the rook on the 7th and the weakened king side, just intuitively. So Rybka plays rook e3, and now we kind of see an increase in kingside pressure with h5, chasing the knight from g4, and another major concession now, giving up the light square bishop. Bishop e4, bishop e4. So the advantage has slightly increased to black after that transaction to minus 1.53 now. That two bishops trump card combined with the rook on the 7th, combined with the slight weaknesses around the king, probably give that big advantage now to black. So bishop f5. Okay, not minding an exchange of rooks, which happens. Knight f3, but this nasty light square bishop is going to do a bit of damage, isn't it? Bishop d3, and now a really painful looking pin to give black a more pronounced advantage, bishop e4. But actually my Rybka's given what it thought was, just on brief analysis, rook e2 as a stronger move, but the pin visually for me looks the more painful move, unless you think that the counterpin means that this pin is kind of harmless. The counterpin is played, rook e1. So answer a pin with a pin. And now we see rook d8. So maybe there's an option now, a real option of bishop f3. For a very tactical reason, actually, there's a very real option here generated. In fact, it's amazing actually that after this move the evaluation has flipped again to a staggering -2.43, because the very real option of bishop f3 is on the cards in variations now, and it's this moment which is very interesting. Why wouldn't it have been an option here, you might ask? What makes rook d8 such a powerful venomous move? Well, I think white was threatening knight takes d2 and then bishop takes g2, rook takes. So rook d8, as well as protecting the queen, if it goes here next, then there's real pressure on f3, for example. But in this position, this is really unpleasant, and what happens here is queen f1, believe it or not. And okay, so you might think the bishop's pinned to the queen, but actually that's disproved here. Bishop takes f3. It can be accepted to lose the queen now. Rook takes e8, and not rook d1. There'll be like bishop c5. It's just rook takes e8 here, and the queen in this position is helpless. It can't go outside of the first rank because of just check, and unless queen f1, then there's a mate on h1. So this echoes the kingside weaknesses mentioned earlier. The queen's totally tied down. The rook and bishop here versus the queen actually favours black in this particular scenario, believe it or not. Now let's just ask the question, how would black make progress if we give a token move like bishop b2? Well, there could be c4. Let's put the bishop there, say, and now say rook d8, and that will just immediately threaten to win back the queen, just being a bishop up basically. And if king h2, this is still harmless because of rook d1, and again this mating idea just wins back the queen. So the rook bishop queen is favouring the rook and bishop here in this particular scenario with these king safety issues. That queen is not lasting long here. So basically Rybka decided to take on a6 and give back the queen, which means, like in another game we covered, Rybka's a bishop down, a whole bishop down now after all that. It's amazing, this magnification of a subtle weakness around the king, leading to a central break, leading to this dynamic scenario of rook and bishop queen versus queen where the queen's helpless, and then just leading to a bishop down. It's quite drastic punishment for small weaknesses. So a bishop up, it's not really that difficult for an engine with black to win this, a bishop up. So let's just see the 2 pawns here. Move 86 might resign here. Okay, essentially winning h pawn, guided by the bishop, queen in square, I guess. Okay, long game. Let's do a quick rundown of the game. It's probably instructive in a few ways. Magnus Carlsen plays that d5 break sometimes in Ruy Lopez, and it just looks instructive. The pawn sack in particular looks a little bit magical. Capturing away from the centre seemed justified to connect the pawns here solidly with b4. The knight manoeuvring was nice, was neat. The cat and mouse game here was interesting. So black was making a major concession there with knight h5 to force g3. So it's on the cards for d5, but when? That's the question. Well, it was when there wasn't a knight on c4, when the knight was kind of driven back, and when it seems as though a kind of longish cat and mouse game, but as though black showed complete disinterest actually at one point in playing for d5. Here, you know, bishop c8, you wouldn't expect later a re-manoeuvring again to create the battery. Like a total disinterest in playing d5 for a long while until this position. So the specifics of this position somehow have indicated to Houdini this is the right time. If I'm going to play d5, play it now. d5. So it's a liberating central break, and the idea is not to take the pawn on c3, which the idea is instead some magic centralization, increasing the piece pressure for unknown usage. Indeterminate continuation. Rook bd8, just putting a rook in the center. Quiet move. White's a pawn up, but seemingly unable to consolidate this pawn up, especially with major issues around the king. And there's probably major tactical threats here, like knight f4, coming to think about it, with h3 being an issue, or just knight f4, bishop h1s. It looks a bit dangerous, as well as knight c3. So anyway, so bishop f5 at least sorts out a little bit of the vulnerability of h3 as part of a consolidation effort, but black stands better now. Doesn't look like a Marshall Gambit. It's got different piece activity to a Marshall Gambit, but the queen on a8, like hitting from the back of the court in a Wimbledon tennis game, seems to be an interesting strategy here. Back of the court, but to important king safety squares, g2, h1 in particular. So knight takes b4. Once this rook is installed on the 7th rank, gives rise to this idea, especially after winning the light squared bishop, of a mysterious self-pin being allowed, and mysteriously a massive evaluation shift after this rook retreat to d8. So basically it takes quite a while for my Rybka to appreciate what's going on here. So bishop takes, and it's spelled out crystal clear. The queen's helpless in this situation, this rook and bishop scenario, even though there's a possibility of winning pawn. The pawn's given that faint possibility of queening, like in another game we saw, but it's that narrow window of opportunity of pawns queening, etc., which seemed to mark with Rybka's play. The use of that little window of opportunity is incredible. But anyway, it's winning the whole queen back straight away, actually. So okay, it wasn't so incredible here. It's just the bishop up and bishop b7 stops the pawn. Not that it was that dangerous. Okay, I think I hyped that up a bit. The pawn wasn't too dangerous in this game. So bishop up. It's a consolidation job. Just the bishop up. Okay, that was game 3 of this recent 40 game match. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.